right, if everybody's ready, I think we could probably get started. All right. Tony, am I good? You can hear me good? Thank you so much. So welcome and thank you for coming. On today's presentation, we have all OCDEL staff and business partners. I am Netta Radzinski, and I work within the Bureau of Professional Development as an external engagement representative. Also presenting today will be Kay Shaw, our Bureau Director of Early Learning for Policy and Professional Development, Sharon Arabia, our Acting Bureau Director of Certification Services, and Coral Manning, our Impact Project Consultant from the State Capacity Building Center. The intent of this presentation is to provide an update on the Impact Project, our certification regulation rewrite project, discuss the next steps of this work, and to document any questions and concerns there may be. I will pass it over to Coral Manning to provide a review of what guides this work.
Netta, just a heads up in the chats, Karen, not sure if I'm saying your last name right, is not able to hear Netta. I can hear you fine. Is anybody else having any issues? All right, Karen, why don't you, it might be something with your volume or your mute or something like that. Sorry about that, but we will be recording it. And so if it isn't working right now, you can always view the recording later. But you probably can't hear me say that anyway. Hi, everybody. I'm Coral Manning, as Netta said. Most of you have heard at least some of what I'm going to discuss today. So we're going to go through this foundational part rather quickly so we don't bore you. If any of this is new to you, please feel free to reach out after the presentation with clarifying questions or at the end when we offer some time for questions at the end. So we're going to start here with the guiding principles. The vision of this work is based in these guiding principles, which were adopted for both the OCDEL strategic plan, which was developed for the preschool development grant Birth to 5, and also in the STAR standards. This grounds the work in a place of stakeholder consensus and provides a basis for the lenses with which we're doing a rewrite process. Go ahead, Nana. So when we set out to create a transparent and engaging process to rewrite the child care certification regulations, we wanted to do it with a special focus on quality, equity, and provider burden. For this project, we're interested in equity and provider burden as it applies to a diversity of provider types. This includes race and ethnicity, gender, language, ability, socioeconomic status, and also geography. We want to think about flexibility so that we can alleviate burden and use an approach that asks us to educate first and regulate second. We want the regulations to be simple and clear so that providers understand and can demonstrate compliance while keeping health and safety of the children at the core, and build upon that health and safety basis to create a continuum of quality practices. So let's think about this continuum from health and safety up through quality like a tree. In this example, the child care provider is the tree. The certification regulations are the soil that provide the base for the tree to grow in, which is a strong foundation and necessary for every tree. Then we think about the sun and the rain as our quality improvement practices like STAR standards or professional development. Some trees can go a really long time without sun or water, but in most cases, these are necessary and helpful to the tree. In the same way, quality improvement practices can move a provider further along their journey toward high quality programming. Now, the leaves on each of the trees or each provider, if you will, are going to look a little different, just as, you know, all the providers in Pennsylvania look a little different from provider to provider. And they also need different levels of support from certification to form that base through quality improvement. Go ahead, Netta. There we go. When we designed the childcare certification regulation rewrite process, we made sure to include these 4 things. So you'll see them up on the screen. We wanted to create a dedicated process to review the regulations so that we could use those lenses for equity, provider burden, and quality. We used a dedicated tool in the review process, which included guiding questions, which we'll discuss a little bit further on the next page. We wanted involvement and participation from every area of the organization, so all throughout different levels of OCDEL, and then a diverse array of the community across Pennsylvania. This was achieved through the ad hoc ELC subcommittee that Kesley will talk about in just a bit. We also wanted the process to be transparent and engaging so that there was a co-creation. And so that is why there was a process of getting input from the community prior to even submitting a draft proposal for draft proposed regulations. Go ahead now. So for my final slide here, I want to give a little bit of depth into the guiding questions that I just mentioned. The guiding questions cover the 5 categories on the screen. For overall clarity and organization, here's where we were asking, is this written in a way that makes sense? Is it clear? And are there several ways to demonstrate compliance or several ways to implement this, what the regulation is asking folks to do? This is where we saw a lot of feedback from folks where they identified places where there were inconsistencies. Not that there were a lot of inconsistencies in the draft, but this is where, if there were inconsistencies, they were identified here. And next we moved on to equity. Here we're asking who's benefiting from this change, or how might this regulation impact providers who have a primary language other than English? So equity here, for our purposes in the project, is providing various levels of support and assistance depending on the specific needs or abilities of the provider. For this project, as I just mentioned, we're looking at diversity of providers in many different ways: race and ethnicity, language, socioeconomic status, geography, and type of provider as well. Then we looked we had guiding questions around quality. Here we're asking, what about this regulation serves as a basis for a provider to move toward a higher star level or toward a higher quality practice? And here we're defining quality as those program activities that go above and beyond basic health and safety measures, such as environments that are conducive to the learning needs of all children, regardless of their abilities, and providing appropriately challenging play-based curricula. In provider burden, here we're asking, how might this regulation impact someone if they were, for example, in an urban setting or a rural setting, or in a specific area of Pennsylvania where there's a different sort of local regulation. Provider burden looks at disparate impact to childcare programs that are differently situated. And for this project, we wanted to mitigate undue burden that might be caused by a regulation, especially if there's a disproportionate impact on one type of provider over another. And then finally, we looked at compliance. And compliance considers where a child care provider must comply with other local, state, or federal regulations. So for this project, we want to ensure alignment with those regulations so that providers aren't impacted differently if they're in one particular city or county. Now I'm going to pass it over to Kesley to talk about how the process was implemented so far.
Thank you, Coral. Good, is it still morning? Yes. Good morning, everyone. Kesley Shaw, Bureau Director for Early Learning Policy and Professional Development. And I really just wanted to say thank you to all of those who participated in the internal working groups and for those that reviewed the drafted proposed regulations and also provided feedback on all of those and also all those who agreed to come back for our phase 2 of the project. So again, just wanted to give a huge shout out to OCDEL staff as well as our business partners as you all were doing the work with drafting and getting those proposed regulations out to the field. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Next slide, please. So I just briefly wanted to go over kind of the process that we had gone through before we had submitted our regulations. So again, the internal working groups, like I previously had said, really drafted the regulations and their subgroups. And then we also had our ad hoc subcommittee review the chapters. And then it kind of went through the circle of life where it came back to the internal working groups and we incorporated their feedback. And then we were able to submit a draft out to our stakeholders, our existing stakeholders and the general public. We got their feedback. And as most of you may or may not know, we received over 2,000 comments, which my team went through each individual comment to see what the feedback was and incorporate that in the draft regulations. And then we submitted the official DHS regulatory package last week. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it over to Netta to talk about some of the different, more in-depth levels of engagement that we had throughout this project.
Thank you, Kesley. Okay, levels of internal and external engagement. This process was designed to incorporate many levels of engagement with our internal stakeholders as well as our external EC community. Those would be providers, advocacy groups, and all those invested in early education and care. Internally, OCDEL staff and business partners, staff from the PAQ, EITA, ELRCs, PDOs, as well as staff from DHS Legal and Policy were part of the process to co-create regulations that embedded equity and quality while reducing or acknowledging provider burden. These invested partners drafted, reviewed, and provided expertise to the initial draft of proposed certification regulations. This initial draft was then shared with our ad hoc subcommittee that was comprised of former ELC members and a diverse group of childcare providers. They were assigned to subchapters of the regulations and they reviewed that subchapter and provided input, which was used to edit the drafts in order to have a draft that we could release to the EC community for further feedback. We used targeted outreach to advise our existing community partners, those advocacy groups and subgrantee groups and others, to provide them updates on the project and encourage them to provide their feedback during our informal external engagement period. The EC community was engaged through the process of reviewing the drafted proposed certification regulations and providing their feedback using the OCDEL certification regulation rewrite project feedback tool. I'll go into further detail about that in a few slides after Kesley discusses some changes from our current certification regulations to our proposed regulations. So we thought that many on this call would be interested to know where changes may lie between what's currently in our regulations and what is in our proposed regulations. And I will pass it back over to Kesley to dive into that.
Thank you, Netta. Sorry, my chair is on the last little leg and I feel like it's going to break at any moment. So good morning again. So again, the current proposed chapters, which I know most of you were aware of as we're going through the review process, we are going from a 3-chapter structure to a 2-chapter structure. So 3310 will be family child care homes and 3320 will be center-based care, child care centers. So again, this was something that happened early on in the project and it has kind of stuck throughout the feedback. And then the next slide, I'll kind of go into some rationale as to why. So Articles 9 and 10 was a huge conversation as we started drafting these regulations as childcare centers and trying to figure out where groups fit, because as you can see, the 3 chapters converted to 2. And due to Articles 9 and 10 and the definitions involved with both of those, group childcare homes are now defined as childcare centers in a residence. And family childcare homes are still family childcare homes serving no more than 6 children. And the reason for this change was to align with the CCDF state plan as well as the CCDF final rule in how they define childcare as family childcare and center-based childcare, and also to align more with the caring for our children basics and caring for our children, which is also embedded throughout the CCDF final rule as the basic health and safety requirements for childcare. So group childcare homes aren't gone, they're just embedded in the childcare regulations chapters now. So the next change that we made was we went from various headers, I think there's about 18 headers right now in the current regulations, to just 5 subchapters: purpose and authority, family and community partnership, professional development, training and requirements, early childhood education programs, and program certification and oversight. And this really goes back to what Coral was saying about clarity and organization, really just kind of compiling the similar regulations into the appropriate subchapters for ease of providers to kind of find things, versus kind of going all over the place sometimes. So really just trying to be more organized and concise with the topics and within those subchapters. And so again, that was early on in the project, and that also was still a change made for the proposed draft. So this was a bigger one. And again, it was also an early on change that we made to professionalize the early childhood field, is to really align our terminology with what the field, the ECE field, what they're called in the field. I know in our STAR standards, we do this, but we weren't necessarily there yet with certification regulations. So again, the current terminology is director, group supervisor, assistant group supervisor, and aide. And those have now transitioned over to director, will say the same, but now group supervisors will be called teachers, assistant group supervisors will be called assistant teachers, and aides will stay as aides. So again, this change was made to align with caring for our children and caring for our children basics, as well as the state plan, and also just to professionalize the field, because this is the terms that they are in the classroom. So we wanted to streamline and align those terminologies. So the next slide talks about the current group supervisor qualifications. I know this was a question and a concern that we're increasing the staff qualifications. And we really wanted to kind of show a side by side of the two, how they currently are, what they are in the proposed regulations. And the staff qualifications did not increase. So again, in most cases, they've actually decreased, but they've also aligned to our career pathway. So as you see on this slide, current group supervisors need anywhere from an associate's degree with 3 years experience or a bachelor's degree in ECE. So there is an array between, like I said, associate's degrees to bachelor's and 3 years experience. Whereas with the proposed teacher qualifications, I think it's the next slide, Netta. The proposed is a level A on the career pathway, and a level A is a current CDA certificate, which is roughly about 9 units. So again, you can kind of see the difference of the staff qualifications did not increase. In this particular case, they've actually decreased, and the years of experience has gone down to 1 year of childcare experience. So I did just want to clarify and show an example of the staff qualifications, because that was some of the concern and feedback that we received, not only from our internal groups, but also from the external partners. So the next slide just shows a high level example, or not example, a high level overview of the career pathway as it's currently written, to show the various levels, because these are incorporated in the proposed draft regulation. So entry level is aides and assistants, level A is teacher, and level B is now directors. So you'll see directors only need an associate's degree, where currently it's very similar to group supervisors. They need an associate's and or a bachelor's degree. So I will turn it over to Netta to kind of go into some of the informal external engagement and what we received from that process. So Netta.
Thank you. All right, so our informal external engagement period was another extra level of engagement with the ECE community. This period was designed to gather input from the general ECE public long before the formal 30-day public comment period, at a time when the proposed regulations were still in draft form and easily edited. We used the OCDEL certification regulation rewrite feedback tool, a web-based survey of sorts that was translatable, to gather input from the field. This tool was open from August 8th of 2022 through August 19th of 2022. We received over 2,000 comments. Each comment was analyzed, coded, and edits to the draft were made when appropriate. Suggestions for technical assistance, training, and resources were documented, and common themes were documented, organized, and discussed. So next up, for the next couple slides, I just want to talk about some of the common themes we got during that informal external engagement period and OCDEL's response. Common themes from this period were training and resources needed for implementation, school-age summer camps applicability, communicable diseases, family engagement handbook and forms, business practices, inconsistencies with CERT staff and citations, professional development, training and requirements, STARS, and age level definitions. OCDEL response. Feedback that indicated an area where training or resources needed was really helpful for us. These concerns were coded specifically to be used in our next phase. That's our resource and planning for implementation phase, and we'll get into that more here in a couple slides. School age summer camps applicability was a major concern for the field. Edits made there were to clearly state that school age summer camps will not be licensed, and we added summer camps to the definitions for further clarity. Communicable diseases and health information were cross-referenced with other offices' regulations, as we must incorporate those into our regulations. Common themes around subchapter partnerships with families and communities. This focused heavily on the need for resources. So OCDEL has a strong understanding that there's going to be a need for templates and other resources within this subchapter. And I think it's important to just notice in this area that the majority of the requirements for this subchapter are already current requirements, but now they are focused in one place rather than scattered throughout the regulations. Feedback indicated that the field had extensive negative feelings about business practices being found within the regulations, and that entire section was actually removed based on feedback from the field. Age level definitions were edited for clarity to ensure, and also to ensure that there were no gaps in age levels. Within professional development, training, and requirements, feedback really indicated a fear of increasing an already stressed staff shortage. But kind of as Kesley spoke to previously, the requirements have not increased and there will be opportunities for waivers. There was concern about providers with many years of experience who may have a fear of further credentialing. We do have OCDEL support in obtaining certificates. And there's also the fact that providers will have 3 years to come into compliance there. Common theme for inconsistencies with certification staff and citations. We're actually going to jump right into that next in our phase 2 with training and resource development. So I am going to pass it on to Sharon for next phase.
Thanks, Netta. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Sharon Arabia. I'm the acting director for the Bureau of Certification. And we are moving into phase 2. So phase 2, we will be moving from the Bureau of Policy and Professional Development to the Bureau of Certification. We will be looking at the operations manual, which is now known as the protocols, the OCDEL staff training and staff training prior to enforcing the regulations, because I know that's always a concern for certification staff, making sure that they have the training prior to implementing the regs. Looking at tools to assist with measuring the compliance, we will be looking at updating any of the forms or the templates, and again, emphasis on training staff prior to the implementation. So the internal working groups will move from the leads going to the regional managers. So as you can see here, each of the 5 sections, there is a regional manager that is assigned to take the lead as we move into phase 2. So the next steps then will be developing a timeline. We will be having a kickoff meeting sometime in January with phase 2 beginning in February.
And then I just wanted to throw this slide on here just to remind folks of the timeline we had shown, I think shown early on in the project. And this is the formal rule approval timeline. So as you can see, fall, winter is where we're at right now, where we have submitted the proposed regulatory package, and it's going through the DHS reviews right now. And then, like I said, if everything goes according to plan, which is why we don't put specific dates and times, we just give seasons. And given the transition that is occurring right now, this is kind of the timeline if everything goes well. So for phase 2, when we are fleshing out our project timeline for that, we're really trying to align it with this timeline, because as we know throughout the process, some things will be changed and edited, but we really just want to at least have a good foundation if we have to make any edits to trainings or templates or resource manuals, that we're at least not just starting as soon as summer of 2024 starts, then we start this process. We really want to start it now. And like I said, just to have a good baseline for when if we do get to the point of summer 2024 and everything's approved and ready to go, our staff is trained, the providers are trained. And I did just want to put a piece in it that I think I forgot early on. We are embedding a 1-year implementation date from the date that the regulations are published. Sorry, I'm having a hard time today with words. So again, that will give people 1 year to come into compliance. And then also throughout the regs, specifically around those areas that we know will be provider burden, for example, staff qualification, we've actually given 3 years. So if all goes well, they won't be required to have the staff qualifications until 2027. And again, there might be some other areas that I'm missing that we embedded some extended timelines, but for the most part, those are the 2 major ones that I did want to say on this call, because again, based on the feedback, we just really wanted to make sure OCDEL team was prepared as well as the providers. We can go to the next slide. So again, this is just some resources that we have had throughout this project. Obviously, our child care regulation rewrite website, which we'll be updating next week with some videos and updates on where we're at with the project. Also posting this webinar just so people are aware of kind of the changes and where we're at. Also, again, the guiding questions and career pathway, as we know, some people had questions about that and kind of what that was. We just wanted to add that here again in case people aren't aware of what those are and where to find them.